Congratulations! You've purchased one of the truly remarkable overlock or serger machines, the Kenmore Overlock. The Kenmore Overlock trims, seams, and overcasts in one easy step, cutting your work time in half and giving all your garments a professional finish. This video will show you how to use your Kenmore Overlock and covers the latest overlocking techniques which make fashion and craft sewing easy. Now, switch the machine on by pressing the power switch located on the right side of the machine. The light will turn on. To thread the Kenmore Overlock, first extend the thread guide bar to its highest position and place good quality sewing thread onto the spool pins. If you are using small spools, remove the spool holders from the spool pins and put the spool caps on top of the spools of thread. This allows the thread to wind off evenly. Raise the presser foot. This allows the thread to be inserted easily between the tension discs when threading. And slide the front looper cover to the right and pull it open. It works from right to left, threading the lower looper, the upper looper, the right needle, and the left needle. Following the green threading diagram for lower looper thread, insert the thread through the right-hand hole on the thread guide bar from back to front. Now, by holding the end of the thread and twisting, it will become firm and easy to control. Using the tweezers supplied, insert the thread through the left hole of the thread guide plate from back to front, then over the top and back through the right hole from back to front. Lead the thread towards you and pass it in the tension assembly and down in the slot. Make sure the thread is correctly inserted between the tension discs by holding both ends of the thread and tugging it gently. Slide the thread into the right groove, hook the thread into the green thread guide, looper thread take-up lever, then to the lower guide on the looper arm. Pull open the side cover and pass the thread through to the left-hand side of the machine. Turn the hand wheel towards you until the needles are in their lowest position. Holding the thread from both ends, hook the thread into the looper thread guide. Now, push the thread through the rear eye of the looper. Turn the hand wheel towards you until the needles are in their highest position and pass the thread across to the right-hand side. Pass it through the looper eye to the rear of the machine. To thread the upper looper, follow the red threading diagram. Put the thread through the thread guide bar and down through the left hole of the thread guide plate from back to front, then over the top and back through the right hole. Lead the thread towards you and pass it in the tension assembly and down in the slot. Make sure the thread is correctly inserted between the tension discs by holding both ends of the thread and tugging it gently. Slide the thread into the left groove, hook it into the red thread guide and the thread guide on the looper thread take-up lever. Turn the hand wheel towards you until the needles are in their lowest position. Hook the thread from behind the looper thread guide, then thread it through the looper eye and to the rear of the machine. To thread the right-hand needle on the Kenmore Overlock, follow the blue threading diagram. Turn the hand wheel towards you until the needles are in the highest position. Place the thread through the thread guide bar, down through the left hole of the thread guide plate from back to front, then over the top and back through the right hole toward you. Pass the thread between the tension discs and down in the slot. Hold both ends of the thread and tug it gently to make sure the thread is correctly inserted between the tension discs. Lead the thread to the left and upward across the take-up lever guide and down through the right-hand slot of the arm thread guide. Then hook it around the needle bar guide and pass it through the eye of the right-hand needle from front to back. To thread the left-hand needle, follow the orange thread diagram. Place the thread through the thread guide bar, down through the left-hand hole of the thread guide plate from back to front, then over the top and back through the right hole towards you. Pass the thread between the tension discs. Hold both ends of the thread and tug gently to make sure the thread is correctly inserted between the tension discs. Hook the thread from the bottom of the thread guide bar. Lead it across the take-up lever guide, then down through the left-hand slot of the arm thread guide. Then hook it around the needle bar guide and pass through the eye of the left-hand needle from front to back. Place all threads under the presser foot. To alter the stitch length, turn the stitch length dial located at the right-hand side of the overlock. A shorter stitch length gives a very strong seam and stops puckering on fine fabrics. A longer stitch length will give a less bulky seam and is suitable for use on heavier fabrics. The Kenmore overlock can be used as either a 4 or 3 thread serger. To sew a wide 3-thread stitch, loosen the lower needle clamp screw and remove the right-hand needle and thread. To sew a standard 3-thread stitch, loosen the top needle clamp screw and remove the left-hand needle and thread. To sew a narrow rolled hem, set the chaining finger on the needle plate to rolled hem position. Here is how to set it. First, open the looper and side covers and disengage the cutting blade by pushing the blade knob in and turn it towards you until the blade locks in its lowest position. Then, while pushing the cutting width adjusting dial in, slide the needle plate setting knob to R position. Depending on the type or thickness of the fabric you sew, the overlock seams may be too loose or too tight. In these cases, disengage the upper knife and adjust the cutting width with the dial to correct the seam tension. When the seams are too loose, turn the dial clockwise to make the cutting width wider. When the seams are too tight, turn it counterclockwise. With a differential feed mechanism which is designed to overcome normal overlocking problems. The regulating dial is located under the stitch length dial. Lightweight fabrics have a tendency to contract, causing seams to pucker. When sewing a lightweight fabric, set your differential feed dial between 1.0 and 0.7. The front feed dog feeds less fabric under the presser foot than the rear feed dog does, creating a stretching effect which eliminates puckering. Knitted fabrics have a tendency to stretch along the sewn edge, causing seams to wave. To sew a seam on a knitted fabric, set the differential feed dial between 1.0 and 2.0. The front feed dog feeds more fabric than the rear feed dog does, creating an easing effect which gives you a straight, smooth finish. A seam line is where the needle enters the fabric, not where the blade cuts the excess away. To sew a seam, lift the presser foot up, place the fabric under the foot, lower the presser foot, and sew. When you get to the end of the seam, keep the foot control depressed and continue sewing, pulling the fabric out to the rear of the overlock. This is called chaining off. Cut the thread on the thread cutter located to the left of the needle bar. On some fabrics, loose loops at the beginning and end of the seam tend to unravel. To backstitch at the beginning of the seam, ensure that there is about 2 inches of chain behind the needle. Place the fabric under the presser foot and sew a few stitches and stop. Lift the presser foot and place the thread chain over the seam line and continue sewing over the thread chain. This cuts off the excess. To secure the end of the seam, stitch to the end of the fabric. Lift the presser foot and turn your work over towards you without pulling on the threads. Place the fabric back under the presser foot, then sew back along a seam for about 1.5 inches. Run the stitching off the edge of the fabric and cut the excess thread away. Another way to secure the seam ends is to thread the chain through a large needle and weave the chain back through the last 3 centimeters or 1 inch of stitching. Then cut the excess thread away. This gives you a neat, secure seam. To sew around an inside corner, make a 3/8 of an inch cut diagonally into the corner of the fabric. Sew along with the seam line. Before you get to the corner, stop with the needle in the fabric. Pull the fabric so that the cutting line becomes straight and continue sewing. When finished, the pleat will disappear and the fabric will return to its original shape. Ribbing is found on most garments, such as windbreakers, t-shirts, and sportswear. For most garments, ribbing should be cut 1/3 smaller than the garment it is being attached to. Seam the ribbing ends together. Then, divide the ribbing into quarters and pin it to the garment. Because we are sewing in a circular manner, cut a small square of material from the seam allowance as a starting point. Place the cut up against the blade and sew around the seam, gently stretching the ribbing at the same time. Be sure to remove pins before they reach the knife blades. When attaching elastic, divide the elastic in quarters to match the quarter marks on your garment. Pin the elastic on the right side of the garment and sew with the fabric extending about 1/4 of an inch past the elastic. Using a stitch length of 4, place the fabric under the presser foot and sew over the elastic, stretching it at the same time. Keep the elastic up against the blade, being careful not to cut it. Turn the elastic up and press the seam allowance down towards the garment. Narrow elastic can be used on swimwear, sportswear, and lingerie. When stitching on narrow elastic of 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch, overlock over the elastic, stretching the elastic at the same time. Fold the elastic in towards the garment. With the sewing machine, straight stitch along the inside edge of the elastic, stretching the elastic as you stitch. This creates a secure seam that will stretch and not draw. To blind hem on the Kenmore overlock, remove the left needle and thread. Fold the hem and press the garment with the raw edges of the hem extending 3/8 of an inch beyond the fold. Stitch along the extended edge, barely catching the fold. When unfolded, the stitching should barely show through to the right side of the fabric. To mock blind a hem, fold the fabric the same as you would for the blind hem. Place the fold of the fabric under the presser foot. Sew along and trim the edge of the fold. Open the seam out flat and your hem is finished. Lace is easily sewn onto lingerie and all types of ladies' wear. To sew on lace, cut the lace to the same length as the fabric. Use 4 threads. Set the stitch length dial to 3, and with the right sides together, place the fabric and the lace under the presser foot. Lower the presser foot and sew, trimming away the raw edges. Press the seam allowance towards the garment. Exposed seams are quick and easy to sew and very attractive on leisure wear, knit fabrics, and lightweight woven fabrics. Exposed seams can be decorated by replacing the upper looper thread with a heavier cord or contrasting color. Cut the upper looper thread close to the spool. Replace the original spool with the new thread and knot the 2 ends together. Cut away the excess threads close to the knot. Raise the presser foot and pull the thread end slowly until the new threads appear from under the presser foot. Then, sew your exposed seams, which now have a highlighted thread. Metallic thread and various yarns can also be used. Only the right-hand needle is used for rolled hemming. Use woolly nylon thread on the upper looper. To set a rolled hem edge, adjust the stitch length dial to 1 1/2, the R symbol, and set the needle plate setting knob to R position. Adjust the needle thread tension to 4 and the lower looper thread tension to 7. Place the edge to be sewn under the presser foot and sew. For a closer or satin stitch, adjust the stitch length dial towards 1. For an open stitch, adjust the stitch length towards 2. To decorate your garment, use of contrasting threads, metallic threads, or variegated threads on the upper looper thread all give your rolled hem an attractive finish. A lettuce edge can be used on children's garments and ladies' wear. A lettuce leaf edge is achieved by rolled hemming a single layer of knitted fabric and stretching it at the same time. Woven fabric should be cut on the bias so that it would stretch as you sew. Pin tucks are used as the decorative finish on all types of fabrics. They can be used on the front of a blouse or a bodice of a dress. To sew a pin tuck, set the needle plate setting knob to the rolled hem position R. Stitch along the fold of the fabric, keeping the fold in line with the chaining finger. Be careful not to cut the folded edge. Sew as many rows of pin tucking as you require, using the whip and the presser foot as a guide. Flat lock seams are used in the construction of windbreakers, tops, and craftwork. By flat locking pieces of cloth together at random, you can construct your own poster-sized fabric. When sewing a flat lock seam, a more attractive finish is achieved by threading the upper loop or thread with the heavy or decorative cotton. For Kenmore overlock, use a wide 3-thread stitch by removing the right-hand needle and thread. To sew a rut flat lock seam, adjust the left needle thread tension to 0. Lower looper thread tension to 6. For loops on the right side of the garment, place the 2 pieces of the fabric, wrong sides together, under the presser foot. Sew along, trimming off the seam allowance. When completed, gently pull the 2 pieces of fabric until the seam lies flat. Flat joining is another method of joining 2 pieces of fabric together. Rather than joining 2 raw edges, as the rut flat lock, flat joining joins 2 folded edges together. To flat join, use the same tension as the rut flat lock. Disengage the cutting blade. On both pieces of fabric, press the seam allowance to the wrong side. Place the folded edges together under the presser foot in line with the blade guard and sew. Gently pull the 2 pieces of fabric apart until they lay open out flat. To flat join squares or rectangles, flat lock all the seams in one direction. Cut the thread chains and complete the patchwork by flat locking the remaining rows in the opposite direction. Various threads can be used to highlight fabrics in the patchwork. Flat lock hemming can be used to decoratively hem skirts, dresses, or t-shirts. With the machine set for flat locking, fold the hem allowance over twice to the wrong side of the fabric. Sew along the fold. When completed, gently pull down the fabric until the hem lies flat. After flat joining, return the blade to its original position by pushing the blade knobs in and turning it away from you until it locks into place. Gathering on woven fabric is simple. Just set the differential feed dial between 1.0 and 2.0, depending on the fabric and the amount of gathering desired. This is effective for bottom hemming on flared skirts. Since you can operate the differential feed dial while sewing, partial gathering on shoulder areas can easily be done when attaching the sleeve. A plain overlock can be used to decorate your garment or finish your craftwork attractively. Use the standard or wide 3-thread stitch. Overlock the edge of the fabric using various decorative threads. To create a braid for trimming craftwork or garments, select the widest stitch possible. remove the right-hand needle and thread. Using a narrow tape or ribbon, sew over the top so it is encased by the stitching. Use a heavy or decorative thread for a more decorative finish. Draw a thread from the grain of the fabric about 1 to 3 inches away from the lower edge. For Kenmore overlock, use a standard 3-thread stitch by removing the left-hand needle and thread. Now set the machine for flat lock right needle thread tension to 0 and the lower looper thread tension to 6. Fold the fabric on the line. Flat lock over the edge, being careful not to cut the fold. When completed, remove the remaining threads by hand, and there you have your fringe. The Kenmore overlock uses the standard sewing machine needle or ballpoint 15 by 1 SP needle for better sewing results. Since the needle greatly affects stitch quality, we recommend changing the needle at completion of each project. To change the sewing needle, use a screwdriver to loosen the needle clamp screw and pull the needle down and out. Insert the new needle, flat side to the back, and push it up to its highest position. Then tighten the needle clamp screw. It is very important to maintain sharp knife blades. When you use basting pins, be sure they are removed from your fabric before they come in contact with the blades. Regular maintenance will ensure that your Kenmore overlock runs trouble-free. Clean around the knife and the looper with a lint brush after every project. A great amount of lint collects in this area because of the cutting action of the machine. Oil your machine regularly to keep it running smoothly. Oiling points are illustrated in your owner's manual. Happy sewing with your Kenmore overlock.